Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to discuss the JMeter interview questions, and you can watch this if you are preparing for JMeter or in general if you want to brush up your knowledge on JMeter. And I will start from scratch, so do not worry if you are a beginner on JMeter or you are at an intermediate or advanced level. I will try to discuss all the relevant questions. So let's get started, and I will share my screen so that you can also see the slides. And here, let me take you to the slides here. Okay, so the very first question that you may be asked is what exactly is JMeter? This can be a very freshers questions, but if you are asked this question, what is JMeter? You can say that JMeter is a performance testing application and it is built on Java. So JMeter is a pure 100% Java application and is built by Apache. So it's a Apache application, 100% free open source built on Java. And you can also say that JMeter is a performance testing application or a performance testing tool. However, in case you want, you can also do functional testing with JMeter. Then if you look at the features of JMeter, so this is completely free. And with JMeter, you can do testing on a variety of applications. So let me also show you. If I just go to the JMeter website, and if I go to this, jmeter.apache.org is the website. And here you can see it says Apache JMeter is a 100% free pure Java application. And these are different applications that we can test with JMeter. So JMeter has different samplers that we will see in a moment. And with that, you can use JMeter for testing a web application, a web service, API, LDAP, database, etc. So there are a lot of things we can do with JMeter. And here, so we also have the option to record. So you can record in JMeter and create your requests. There are inbuilt components for reporting and assertions. We will see that in a moment. And then you can also extend JMeter using some plugins. So one important question is JMeter is a server-side performance testing tool. And that means when you test your application on JMeter, it actually records and tests the communication with the server. So if you are using any client like a browser, it will not take into consideration the client metrics like the render time of the browser and so on. So it is basically testing the server performance. Then if you are asked a question, how to set up JMeter on your system? So based on Windows or Mac, you can say that. So let us say step number one here is we always have to check Java version because JMeter is a Java application. And let us say if you are on Windows, you can go to your command prompt. So I'm going to my command prompt here, and I will say Java space hyphen version, and it gives me the version of Java. And because I have Java on the system, I can work with JMeter on this system. In case you are on Mac, you can go to terminal, and again, you can run the same command, Java space hyphen version, and this will show you the Java version. If you do not have Java or you do not have it Java set up on the system, then you can set up first before working with JMeter. So this is step number one. We have to check Java is available, and then we have to download JMeter and unzip the folder. So if you go to your JMeter website and go to download, so you can see a download page here. If you go here we have the binaries and source from where we can download, and in general you can get the zip folder from here and unzip and keep at any location on your system. And if I show you on my Windows, my JMeter is downloaded and unzipped here, so you can see it is here. So this is my JMeter folder which I have unzipped it here, and if I go inside JMeter, I will see all these folders. And for Windows, I will go inside the bin folder, and here there will be a file called jmeter.bat, and you can see it is here. So the file jmeter.bat is here, and this is what I will use to start JMeter. On Windows, I can just double click and start JMeter. If I'm on Mac, I will have to go to terminal, and then from there, I will use the file jmeter.sh. So for Windows, you can run this file from command line or directly just double click here and it will start JMeter. You can see JMeter is getting started on my Windows system. and we have got JMeter here. If you are on Mac or Linux, then you will have to go to, so let me just go to the folder where I have JMeter, and yes, so I have my JMeter on my Mac system here. And if I now go to the bin folder, there will be a file jmeter.sh here. And this is what I will use from terminal. So I can just open my terminal and I can go to the location, or I can just drag and drop this file here. And if I run this, it will start JMeter. I can also say sh jmeter.sh. So I will allow this. And this should start JMeter on Mac system, or it can also start on a Linux system with the same command. I can also here say, if I just go to this location, bin folder, you can see JMeter is starting here. And if I just go to a new terminal, I will cd to this location, which is the location of my JMeter bin folder. And then I can say sh jmeter.sh. This will also start JMeter. And you can see JMeter is getting started here. Let me exit from here. And JMeter is started here. So I will just close it for now. So this is how we start JMeter. So this is on Windows and Mac or Linux operating systems. Now, if you are asked about the overview or GUI and the features of JMeter, now this may not be a direct question that, explain the GUI or explain the features of JMeter, but it can be asked indirectly, that like, where will you see the logs? How will you open the log viewer, and all these kind of questions. So for that, let me show you. If you go to your JMeter, you will see there is a menu bar at the top. This is the menu where you can see file, edit, search, etc. This is the main toolbar. You will find most commonly used actions here. Then here is the test plan, and all the elements that we add in the test plan will be shown as a tree view here. And then this is the editor window, where you will see the editor for any element that you select from the test plan. Also, you can see here, we have options for log viewer. So I can go here, click here, and the logs window will be shown at the bottom here. And then here you can see some more options like the users. While your test is running, you can see the active users, and you can see, or this button will be green while the test is running. All this you can see here. So, and all these are the main toolbar, all the frequently used actions. So this is like the GUI of JMeter. These are the main components, and I will tell you about the features as we go through this session. So here, another very important question will be how do you prepare your test plan, or how do you prepare for a performance test. Now this is very, very important, and before you start doing any kind of performance test, it is very, very important that you have the necessary approvals, authorization, and permissions to do the performance test. So for performance testing and security testing, it is very important to get all the permissions, because in performance test you will be putting so much of load on the application and the servers, and you will be using so many virtual users. So you should have permission and authorization to do this performance test from the owners of the application, or from your client, or maybe from your team managers. Whoever is the authorized person to give you approval and authorization, you should take that authorization first. And then you should understand the application very, very carefully. And it is very important that you know the application, all the details, you have all the details of the application, the URLs, the test data, the scenarios, etc. And you should be knowing what scenarios you have to run for performance test, and what is the flow of the scenarios. The other very, very important thing is the environment for performance test. So whenever we do performance test, it is very important that you create a separate environment. You can take help from your IT or infrastructure team to set a separate environment for performance testing. And this is required because when you do performance tests, you will be hitting the environment, hitting the servers with thousands and millions of virtual users. And if that environment is being used for some other activity, like for some other QA testing or any other thing, it can hamper that activity. So it is very important to use a separate environment, and that environment should not be used for any other activity, so that whenever you run your performance test multiple times, you get consistent results. And the other factors like the network, the server, all these things should not hamper your test or should not hamper the consistency of your test. So it is very important to set up an environment, and you should have a complete list of requirements, what to test, what are the scenarios, and all those details. The test data is very important. You should know what is the test data and what test data you have to use for the performance test. And then you should also be knowing what is the expected behavior on running the performance test with some particular amount of users. What should be the performance of the application? And this you can take from the stakeholders, from the owners, or whoever has assigned you the performance test. You can ask them that what is the expected outcome, or what is the expected performance of the application, and how many users should I use, or how many virtual users should I use to run the performance test, and then what should be the performance or the expected behavior. You can also create a baseline or ask for a baseline. A baseline is that you have the expected performance against the number of virtual users. So for example, for 10 virtual users, what is the expected performance? What is the response time, the average response time, median, all those things, the lag time, the network time, all those things. And then what happens when you increase the load to 100, to 50, 100,000, 10,000, and so on. So there will be a complete report in a tabular format, most probably a CSV format, where you will have all this baseline, that for every performance or user load, what are the metrics, what are the performance, so that whenever you run the next performance test, you can run with the same amount of users, and then you can compare that last time with 10 users, this was the performance. This time with 10 users, what's the performance? Last time with 100 users, this time this was the performance. Now what is the performance? Now it may also happen that sometimes you may not get the baseline. In that case, you can create a baseline yourself. For example, you can start with one user and record all the metrics, then increase the load to 5, 10, 50, 100, and so on. And then you keep on recording the performance so that you will get a baseline. And now next time, whenever you run your performance test, you can compare against this baseline. So baseline is very important, and this is how you prepare for a performance test. Now, let us understand about test plan. So here, test plan is like a project, and it will have all the other elements of your performance test. And here, if I show you, this is my JMeter. And you can see this is the test plan. If you want, you can just go to here, file, and create a new test plan. And you can also click on this new button to create a new test plan. Now inside the test plan, the very important and the first element we add is the thread group. So I go to add thread and thread group. And in the thread group, we can give the user count, the virtual users, and all these details. So test plan is like a project where you have all the other elements of the performance test, and it is saved as a .jmx file. So if I save this test plan, if I click on the save button, and let me just save it on my desktop, and you can see here, the extension is .jmx. So I'll just say this is demo test, and this is getting saved. And you will also see the location at the top of your JMeter. Now, if I talk about thread group, so coming back to test plan, in a test plan, at minimum, you should have a thread group and one or more samplers. This is the minimum requirement to run any test. So you should have a thread group and at least one sampler in a test plan. And now, coming to thread group, if you are asked any question about thread group is a collection of threads or users. Threads is virtual users. And here, every JMeter test plan starts with this element, that is thread group, and each thread represents one or more users using the application. So if I show you this thread group, you can see here, we give the name of the thread group. It can be anything. Comments, this is optional. and then action to be taken after a sampler error. Do you want to continue or start next thread group or stop the thread, stop the test, etc. And here you can see the number of users or number of threads. So here is where we give the number of users, and then we give some ramp up time. So in how many seconds should these 10 users be added? So if I say ramp up time is 10 and I say 10 users, that means one user will be added every second until 10 users are completed in 10 seconds. And then if you want to loop or continue the iteration, then we can give the loop count here. And then here we have some more options for the timings and schedule. So this is our thread group. Now we also have step up and tear down thread group. If you go here to test plan and do a right click and say add and go to threads, we have setup thread group and tear down thread group. So as the name suggests, setup thread group will run before the actual thread group. Tear down thread group will run after the main thread group is executed. So if you want to do any kind of setup before or after running the actual thread, you can use setup or tear down thread groups. And we have already seen the number of users, ramp up, ramp down, and loops and iterations. So this is about test plan and thread group. Now coming to controllers in JMeter. So in JMeter, we have two types of controller. We have samplers and logical controllers. So samplers and logical controllers both are controllers in JMeter. And these are called controllers because they are the elements that actually process the request. So coming to samplers, here, if I go to my JMeter and go to thread group, do a right click and say add and go to sampler, you can see there are so many samplers in JMeter. And the sampler you will select based on the application you are testing. For example, if you are testing a web application, you will select the HTTP request sampler. If you are running a FTP test, you will select the FTP request sampler. Similarly, there will be a JDBC sampler for database and so on. So based on the application, we have samplers in JMeter, and these are the actual elements that run the request. So these are samplers, and here these are processed in order as they appear in the thread group. For example, if I add a HTTP request here and say this is HTTP request 1 and save, and now if I add another sampler, let us say HTTP request again and say this is HTTP request 2. Now when I run this, it will get executed in the same order. That is, HTTP request 1 will get executed first and then HTTP request 2. So they will be executed in the same order as they appear in the tree, unless we add any kind of controllers or logic to change this sequence. Then all the samplers except flow control action generate some kind of result. So there is a sampler flow control action. If I show you, this is for pausing. So here is flow control action, and this can be used to add some pauses or delays, and you can give the duration in milliseconds. Except this sampler, all the other samplers will create some kind of result. Now, coming to logical controllers, these are the elements that determine the order in which the samplers are processed. And here, this will let you customize the logic that JMeter uses to decide when to send the request. So basically, it will control the order or the logic. And if I show you, I will go here and go to my thread group and do a right click and say add. We have so many logical controllers. So we have if controller, if you want to add some condition before running your sample request. We have transaction controllers, we have loop, while, interleave, runtime controller, simple controller, throughput. So all these different controllers are there. I had created a video on these logical controllers, so you can watch that as well. And these controllers can determine the order in which the samplers are processed. Now, in JMeter, we have some reporting elements called listeners. So let me show you. Let me just add some request here. Let me just say google.com here, and this is HTTPS, and I'll just add the path. Now here, the protocol which is HTTP or HTTPS comes in the protocol section in case of a web application test. And if it is HTTP, even you can leave it blank. Then the server name will come here. That is the domain name or the server name. And then the rest of the path will come here. So if I have to go to, let us say, videos page, I will give the rest of the path here. If I have to go to the home page itself, I will just give a / here. And then this is the HTTP request method. And for a general web application testing, it can be only GET. But if you are using any API testing or web services testing, you can select the HTTP request from here. And then if you have any port number, you can give it here. And now to check the result, I have to add a element or component called listeners. So here we have listeners, and there are many listeners in JMeter. Some are tabular listeners, some are graphical listeners, some are tree listeners. So let me just add a view results tree here. And I'll just keep the thread group as number of users as 2 and ramp up period as 1 second. And if I now save and run from here, so let us see, you can see I'm getting this response here in the view results tree listener. And if I want to clear the listener, I can use this button to clear. And if I want to clear all the listener and all the logs from my test plan, I can use this double broom icon here. So this is clear all, and I can run again. And also when I run, you will see there is these buttons, stop and shut down, get enabled. So let me show you again. As I run, you can see here, stop and shut down gets enabled. Now, what's the difference here? When I click on stop, it will abruptly stop the session, will stop the test without waiting for the threads to complete. Whereas if I click on shutdown, it will gracefully end the test. It will wait for all the currently running threads to complete the execution, and then it will shut down. So this is the difference. In case it is asked, you can say this. And then, so listeners are the components that show the results of the samplers, and there are different types of listeners. Some are trees, some are tabular, some are graphical listeners. And here in the listeners, you can also give a file name to save the results. So if I want to save all these results in the file, I can give the file name here, and it can be a CSV file, and all the results will go there. Also, if you want to import the results from a CSV file into any of the listeners, even that you can do. For example, if I have my results in a CSV file and I browse my file here, so this will get populated. So it works both the ways. And then some listeners can use a lot of memory. So it is always suggested that you use the listeners which do not consume a lot of memories. In general, any tree listener, like I have used view results tree here, or any kind of graphical listeners, like if I show you some graphical listeners, I will go to listener, and you can see we have here graph results, aggregate graph. All these listeners consume a lot of memory. So it is recommended and suggested that you can use these listeners while you are creating your test or while you are debugging. But after you have done all the things and when you want to run your actual performance test, we should disable these listeners. So you can do a right click here and say disable. And you can just use a simple data writer listener. So for example, I will go to add listener again. And here we have listener like simple data writer. Here, it will just log the results to the result file, whatever location of the result file you give here. So it will not create any data here in JMeter, but it will just log the results in the result file. So this is a safe listener to use whenever you are running your actual performance test. Also, it is recommended that you run your actual performance test from command line, not from the JMeter GUI. And for command line, let me just show you. If you have to run your test from command line, step number 1 will be open command prompt or terminal in case of Mac or Linux. And then step 2 will be, so let me increase the font. Step 2 will be go to the location of JMeter bin folder on your command line. So you can go to the location of your JMeter bin folder. Now, in case you give the location of your JMeter bin folder in your path environment variable, then you can use this command from anywhere. Like you can just go to your command prompt or terminal and can directly run the command. Otherwise, you have to first go to the bin folder of JMeter and then run the command JMeter -n. So I will say here JMeter -n is for non-GUI mode. Then -t is to give the location of your test file, that is your .gmx file or the test plan file. Location of GMX file you can give here. Make sure that in the path there are no spaces, like the folder names does not have any spaces. And if there are any spaces in any folder names or any file names, make sure that you put that within quotes like this. And then -l is to log the results and then give the location of result file. You can use a CSV file here. And when you run this command, it will run your test from command line. So it is always recommended that after you create your test, always run from command line. Now, we have already discussed this. To minimize the amount of memory needed, use simple data writer or any simple listener so that it does not consume a lot of memory. Now coming to assertions. So assertions are like checks or validations that we do, and you can add assertions. So it is just to check the actual is equal to expected. And you can go to your thread group, do a right click and say add. And we have assertions here. And again, we have a lot of assertions. So you can see response assertion if you want to check something in the response, that this response should contain some particular response code or some particular text or headers and so on. Then there are assertions like, if I go back, if you are using a JSON, if you are having a JSON response, you can add JSON assertion. You can put assertion on size, that the size should be between this or should be less than or should be more than this particular size. And then there are duration assertions, and you can see duration is here. And so many other assertions are there. You can say XML assertion, XPath assertion. So based on your application, based on the responses you are getting, you can add these assertions. And these assertions will be executed or processed based on where they are located or in the same scope. For example, if I move this assertion, if I move this response assertion, so as of now, this response assertion and size assertions are added at a thread group level. So they are just under the thread group. So they will be executed for every request which is there inside this thread group. However, if I drag this response assertion and put it inside HTTP request 1, now this assertion will only work for HTTP request 1. The same goes for listeners as well. If I put this listener as a child of any of the request, then this listener will only be getting the response or the result of that particular request. So you can make them child for any particular request by dragging and dropping. So these are, this is about listeners and assertions. Now config elements in JMeter are the elements which can be used to set up some defaults or variables that can be used by other samplers. So if I show you, I go to thread group, do a right click, add, and here we have config elements. So we have a lot of config elements like CSV dataset config if you are using a CSV file for our test data. If you are using any HTTP request and you want to set header or cookie or cache, all this you can do. Then we have FTP request defaults if you want to set some defaults for your FTP request. Then JDBC configuration to set the connection to the database, and configuration elements are executed first when you run your test plan. So if you have any config element in your test plan, they will be executed first and then you will have the other elements. So these are config elements. I again have created a video on config elements. I will put the link in the description of this video and you can watch all these, watch and learn about all these config elements. So these are processed at the start and the scope in which they are found. Again, as I said, that if you add any config element, let us say I will go and add a config element. I will say HTTP cookie manager. So as of now, it is at a thread level, thread group level. So it will be executed for all the requests and before all the requests. But if I make this as a child of HTTP request 1, then it will only be executed for HTTP request 1. So this is what it is saying, that it will be executed as per the scope it is present on. Then we have timers in JMeter. Timers are to add some delays or pauses, and it is recommended that you always add some think time and some delays in your test so that it can mimic a real world scenario. So in real world, whenever users are using the application, they are not just keep on hitting the requests and hitting the servers. They take some time, they do some action, then maybe pause for some time and then do some other action, go to one page, go to other page, and things like that. And therefore it is recommended that we add some think time or pauses. Now, if you go to JMeter and go to your test plan and do a right click, or just go to your thread group and go to do a right click, you will see we have an option, add think time to children. So you can use this and you will see a think time here, and here this is a timer added. So this is a uniform random timer, and similarly we have other timers. And also, if you just do a right click on the thread group and say add and go to timer, you can see all these different timers. Now you can also go to templates. So you can see there is a option for templates here on the main toolbar. And here you can see some templates or sample projects. And whenever you have to start with JMeter, if you want, you can use any of these templates, so that if I say build a web test plan or build an advanced web test plan, and you can see the details. And if I say create, you will see I get a test plan already created with all the basic elements already added. So I do not have to start from scratch, and now I can build over it. I can add my request, and you can see all these config elements are added: request default, user defined, cookie manager, header manager, and all these things and listeners are added. And I can just add to this. So you can do like that as well. You can use templates. I will go back to my earlier request. All right, I'm here. So you can add timers for adding some delays. So to add pause or delay before sampler request, we can add these timers. And if you don't add any of these pauses, then JMeter will just keep on running the request without pausing, which is not a real world scenario. So this is how you can add these timers. And if more than one timers are used in a thread group, then it will, JMeter will sum up and then accordingly add the pauses or the delays. And again, it can be added as children of the samplers. Now coming to preprocessors and post-processors, as the name suggests, preprocessors are the elements that will be executed before the sampler request, and post-processors will be executed after the sampler request. So here, if I go and do a right click and say add, so you can see preprocessors, and here we have some scripting preprocessors. If you want to add some script, some user parameters, HTML links, JDBC preprocessor, sample timeout, bean shell preprocessor. So if you want to do any kind of setup or run anything before your actual sample request, you can use these preprocessors. And similarly, we have post processors. If you want to do anything after the request has executed, like a tear down or do any kind of setup, you can do in post processors as well. So post processors will run after the sampler request, and if you want to process any response data or extract any values, you can use these post processors. Then we have test fragment, and it is a special type of controller which is used with include and module controller. So here, if I show you, if I do a right click and say add, here is an option test fragment, and I can add this test fragment. So this is used only with include and module controller. I had created a video for include and module controller. I will add the link for that video in the description, so you can watch that and you will have a complete idea how the test fragment works. In general, it is used only with include and module controller, and it is purely used for code reuse with test plans. So that is test fragment. And then there are some non-test elements as well. If you do a right click on your test plan and go to add, you will see these non-test elements. And here we have HTTP mirror server, HTTPS test script recorder, and property display. Now out of these, HTTPS test script recorder is commonly used and is very important, and it is used to record our request. So if you do not want to manually add your request and want to record your HTTP request, you can use the HTTP test script recorder. I have a separate video on that as well. Then property display is if you want to see all the properties of your system or JMeter, you can use this. So you can see as of now, it is JMeter checked, and you can see all the JMeter properties and configurations here. This is the key and these are the values here. If I select system, you will see all your system properties and all the details like Java version, all the locations, runtime, etc. All this you can see in property display. And then if you want to get some data and mirror the servers from and get the data from there, you can use HTTP mirror server as well. So this is very rarely used. These are the non-test elements. Now coming to the execution order, again, this is very important question and it can be asked, and in general, you should know about this. So the execution order in a JMeter test plan is the configuration elements are executed first. So whenever you run your test plan, if you have any configuration element, that will be executed first. So whatever configuration element you have, that will be executed first. Then the preprocessors, if you have any preprocessors in your test plan, they will be executed. Then the timers, so that it can calculate the pause time and accordingly it will add the pauses and delays. Then the actual sampler request, whatever sampler request you have added, HTTP request, LDAP, JDBC, they will be executed. And then after the actual request, it will execute the post processors. If you have added any post processors, then the assertions to check the response and do the validations. And finally, the listeners. So finally, all the response after checking the assertions and everything, response, everything, you will get the results in listeners. And these three elements, post processors, assertions, and listeners, will be executed only when you have some sample results. So because these work on the sample results, so they will be executed only when you have some sample results. So this is the execution order. Now coming to some best practices for performance testing and JMeter, and I will say performance testing in general. So I have already discussed that always use a separate environment so that you do not hamper, you do not interfere with any other activities, you do not bring down the servers and it hampers any other activity. And also, if you are using a separate environment dedicated to performance test, your results will be consistent, and when you rerun and do multiple iterations, you can rely on those results. So always create a separate environment. You can take help from your IT team, from your infrastructure team to set up the environment. And in general, it can be a replica of the production environment so that the server size and all the configuration is same as the production environment so that you get consistent and realistic results. So this is the first thing. Run your test with the same infrastructure, network, statistics, configuration, etc., so that you get consistent results, because you will be running your performance test multiple times. On every change, on every release, you will be checking that whether this change has impacted the performance or this release has impacted any performance. So you will be running your performance test all through the project. So it is very important that you use and run the performance test on the same environment with the same configuration and infrastructure so that your results are consistent and you can rely on them, and you can compare with the baseline. We have already discussed what is a baseline, so it is important to have a consistent environment to compare with the baseline. Then as we discussed, create realistic performance test. If you do not add any think time, if you do not add any pauses, then it will not be a very realistic performance test, and it can overwhelm your servers, and you may say the performance is not good, but that might not be the real result. So always use think times and pauses, and also add some ramp up. Do not directly start with 1,000 users in 1 second. We have already seen here. If I go to the thread group, you can see we can add a ramp up here. So let us say if I'm using 100 users, I will say ramp up of 10 seconds. That means every 1 second, 10 users will be added, and in 10 seconds, there will be 100 users added. So the users are ramping up gradually. It is not like 100 users are starting all at once. So it is always good to add some ramp up. Always have baseline to compare your test. We already discussed what is a baseline. So always have a baseline so that you know that this performance is better or worse than the earlier baseline. So you can have a baseline always. Also, as we have discussed, JMeter checks the server performance, and if you have any client like a browser, it will not consider the browser render time or any metrics of the client. So make sure that you have this in mind when you see your performance. Always focus on the areas that needs performance, and this will for this you will have to discuss with the stakeholders, get the requirements very clearly, know the application, know the use cases, know the scenarios, so that you know that what scenarios to run, how to run, what is the workflow, so that you can test the actual components and scenarios which needs to be tested for performance testing. And always document your results. So you can create a matrix, you can create a CSV file, and in the CSV file, you can create rows and columns. So for every run, you can put a timestamp, date and time, and you can put your results in the columns, and it will also help you to compare your results. So if you have all the results in a tabular structure in CSV in different columns, you can very quickly compare that, what was the result of last run and what's the result now, and then you can add some formulas, addition, subtraction, and you can get the final result. So it will be very useful to document your results in a proper way. And these are the best practices. And these are some of the questions that you can face during interviews and in general for your general overview of JMeter. I hope this will help a lot. If you have any questions, do let me know in the comment section below. If you want me to focus on any particular area of JMeter or performance test, you can let me know. I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching and never stop learning.